And this one looks like it has a bite out of it. And this one. And there's one over here. Looks like it's holding some water. Huh? I think it's time to go.
Hey y'all, welcome back to No Vacancy. We just want to start by thanking our guests who subscribed. It really helps us out and we appreciate it. We hope you enjoy your stay with us tonight in room 66. Tonight's stories are people's personal encounters with Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot. This legendary creature, thought to be a cross between a giant human and an ape that live among the forest wilderness, has been reported sightings all over the world. California has the most reported Bigfoot sightings in the U.S. Yosemite, California is already believed to be one of the most haunted national parks. Among many of its urban legends, Yosemite is believed to be the very first home of Bigfoot. The sightings here tend to be more of the frightening nature. Yosemite has been home to numerous Bigfoot sightings dating back to the very first years in which the legend started. It's easy to believe that this hairy and mysterious creature would call Yosemite home with its vast amount of forest. Here's just a few scenes before these personal accounts are read, just to give you an idea of what really goes on in Yosemite National Park. Let's begin.
We really didn't realize what we were dealing with. We still don't know what we're dealing with, but it was something very unusual. Strange things happen, and most of the stuff happened in the evening time, just at dusk, nighttime, like now. The first time I ever heard anything was later in '71. I came back up with the guys, and as soon as it starts getting dark, we'd go in. Sometimes you might hear a grunt or a whoop or a big blowing sound or something like that, and that's when you know you want to get inside the shelter because you still don't know what you're dealing with. Whatever it is big, very, very big. We all go inside, close the shelter door, and that's a log that we put between these trees, and then we'd strap it inside a cable, and then they would start making their sounds. And that was in '71 when I first started hearing them, and we started recording them.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks. That's our dog.
We were all talking about maybe having to shoot our way out. You're just sitting there, all of you are kind of petrified. You're just waiting for the walls to break open, something reach in there and grab you and hold you up, and waiting for the light to break in the cracks of the walls, and never happened. That's the strange part, because you hear it over there, but you don't see it over there. As time went on, '72, same thing. You know, whatever it was, we thought might be trying to scare us out. Maybe this is their territory, but we don't know. We can only guess at why they were doing what they were doing, and but they were observing us, that's for sure.
Did you
Sound
hear
like
that?
it's screaming at me, yeah.
Oh wow. Did you
Sound
hear
like
that?
it's screaming at me, yeah.
Oh wow. Did you
Sound
hear
like
that?
it's screaming at me, yeah.
Oh wow.
As soon as I start this, nah?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
He and his wife and grandson first heard that howl when they were walking back to their car at the end of the trail along the Vermilion River, about 45 minutes from the town of Sioux Lookout. Initially, Mikas thought it was a moose or a bear, but the experienced hunter quickly realized that it was a sound he's not familiar with. Mikas posted 2 videos on YouTube where they have since gone viral, racking up 2 million views. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, a wolf, Mikas says we may never know.
Yosemite National Park isn't just full of beauty and visitors, it's also a place full of mysteries. Millions pass through its gates every single year. On your next visit to the park or any national park, there's a list rangers want you to be aware of. It's a list of people who entered the park but never left. I spoke to a Fresno woman who's still wondering what happened to her loved one.
Visitors from all over the world come to our national parks just like Yosemite for the beauty and to take in nature. But for some, their trips turn out a lot differently than they expected.
This story, David's story, has gone cold, and his case is not the only one.
When someone goes missing or there's some sort of crime that happens and it's not solved, it goes into what we call the cold case file.
Scott Getteman from Yosemite says all of these cases are still active, and they are not going anywhere until investigators from the park find out what happened. The oldest one on the list dates back to 1969. There are more than 24 cold cases on this list, from missing people to unsolved homicides. Yosemite and Grand Canyon are the most popular ones on the list. In Yosemite alone, there are 10 cases dating from 1972 to the most recent in 2016, people who have simply disappeared.
Okay, so I have a story that happened to me and my friends. To set the scene, we were on a Boy Scout camping/shooting trip. There were 20 to 30 of us. We were in a little cabin thing with windows in the front and back, and a front and back door. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin with the bathroom was about 1/8 of a mile down the gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system because it's Boy Scouts. So it's around midnight and everyone has been telling scary stories, like normal camping trips. Well, I had to go to the bathroom and asked my friend to come along. He said sure, and we got our knives. We knew that there were bears in the woods and it made us feel safer. Well, we went to the bathroom and began our walk back. This is where it got scary. I felt an instinctual, not sure if that's the right word, but fear. I look at my friend, and he had the same look as me. We begin to walk a little faster and unfold our pocket knives. I then turn around and see it. It was 6 feet tall and was on its hind legs, kinda hunched over. I freaked the heck out and started running. My friend sees it too, and we sprint back to the cabin. It began making a moaning/howling noise. It was somewhere in between the two, and followed us slowly. We pound on the door and the guys let us in. We tell them what we saw and they actually believed us. So we lock the front door and look at the back door. It had no lock. We pushed a table up against it and had a kid there with his knife for safety. We draw the blinds on the windows that had them. One of them didn't. And we sat there with the lights on. Then, we see the eyes outside of the windows without blinds. We're all shitting ourselves, and the thing slowly walked to the back door. We heard it bumping up against it, maybe trying to open it, we think. Then it left. But we still thought we were going to die. No one slept. When the adults came to wake us up, we told them and they laughed at us and said we were making it up. We know it happened, even if they don't believe us. About 10 years ago, my family and I were up in Yosemite to cut down some wood. My dad was driving our truck with my grandpa in the front seat, and my mom and my sister in the back seat. I was in the bed of the truck, along with our family's German short-haired pointer. We were driving along a forest road, and all of a sudden, my dog starts barking and growling. So I looked to see what it is, thinking maybe it's a bear or a mountain lion. What I saw was a tall, dark figure walking parallel to the road, about 60-70 yards away. I yelled at my dad to stop the truck. When I told him I think I seen Bigfoot, he just laughed and continued to drive. When I looked back to get another look, the figure had changed directions and was walking away from the road. The last thing I saw was the thing's head disappearing down a hill. To this day, I still do not have an explanation for what I saw. Every time the situation comes up, My dad always makes me tell everyone my story. When I was about 10 years old, I went on a field trip with my 4th grade class to a summer camp. For the most part, it was a typical experience. Rafting, bad food in the mess hall, hiking, campfires, etc. Hell, one of my friends did the typical movie thing and brought a dirty magazine from home. We were supposed to be there for 4 days. I only lasted about 2. It was late at night because I stayed up to do the trash duty and clean the mess hall. After I picked up the final granola bar wrapper, I made my way to the showers to clean up before turning in for the night. Halfway through, I hear a loud shuffling sound outside of the showers. I stop what I'm doing and listen intently, but the shuffling stops. I assume it's my friends pranking me as they typically do, and get out of the showers. Just to put this into perspective, the showers in the boys' cabins are a good walk away, with no way to illuminate your surroundings. That's why they shower before dark and with groups to make sure nobody gets lost. For someone like me who's by himself having to navigate his way through the woods, it's pretty freaking terrifying. To make matters worse, the flashlight I bought was back at the cabin, so I was stuck having to navigate my way back with a piece of shit lantern that barely gave me enough light. So anyway, I grab the lantern and start my walk back to the cabins. About halfway through, I hear this ungodly loud moan coming from right in front of me. I panic and drop the lantern, running in the opposite direction of the sound. I can't see anything. In my haste, I fall on something. I examine the thing I fell on and realize it's squishy and soaking wet. I hear the moaning again from behind me and book it to the direction of the cabins. I'm instantly greeted by 3 flashing lights and concerned looks. Apparently, the other campers heard the moans and the counselors went to investigate, only to find me, covered in head to toe in blood. They brought me back to the cabin, and I'm immediately bombarded with questions about what I saw. My friend shut them up after a while. The next day, I went home. Could you blame me? I was not going to stay there after the shit that I had been through. I almost forgot about this incident until a while ago when I was reminiscing about this with one of my friends who stayed at the camp. I asked him what happened after I left, and what he told me sent a shiver up my spine. Apparently, after I left, the moans at night got louder and closer to the cabins and freaked everyone out. And as for that big mound I fell on, while the counselors were investigating the source of the moaning, they found a deer on the trail I was on. The head was ripped clean off, and its entrails were laying in a separate pile next to the carcass. That's my encounter. To this day, it remains the scariest experience I've ever had in my life. Everyone I've told this thinks that I'm bullshitting, but my friends who were there always defend me. I still don't know what was in the woods that night. My dad and I were hunting in the mountains of North Idaho City. It was about twilight, and we were hiking back to the car. We began to smell something terrible, like burning bone and hair. It was like the worst stench I've ever experienced. The smell got worse as we kept hiking. We could hear what we thought was someone or something running at a great rate of speed from behind us. My dad grabbed me and held my face to his chest and dropped to the ground. I held close to him as the running got louder. My dad readied his rifle, and I heard him say, "Oh no, son, stand up, walk with me, look at the ground." Terrified, I stood up. Stupid me turned around and looked, and there were the remains of an elk. The head looked like it had been put in a blast furnace. The hair on the body was all singed. The hooves looked melted. The running was gone. We moved closer to the car, and it was now nearly dark. About 100 yards from the car, we heard the running again and we froze. All of a sudden, the forest lit up like noonday. We heard a very loud whoosh, and it was gone. The forest was dark. It was quiet. Dead still. We booked it to the car, threw our gear in the back, and drove. I kept my head down and just cried. Dad was static and silent. Halfway out of the woods, we saw a tall, dark figure run through the forest, and then it was gone again. We made it back to Idaho City and stopped at the Gold Mine Grill to regroup. Went inside and there was another hunter in there. He looked at us and said, "Y'all see that shit?" He just stared and drank. When I was a kid, I was playing by the woods at night catching fireflies. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, about a half-hour drive to the closest town. Well, anyway, I hear some sticks breaking, and I'm getting excited thinking it might be a wild turkey. I was obsessed with the things, even though they weren't known for the area. I was a dumb kid, but now I know that by the sound of the cracking sticks, that it could not have been a turkey, but something quite a bit bigger. I run over towards the trees and further from the house, and I start to get this feeling. Like I felt before, I was about to be punished. Shots of adrenaline and fear. I stopped moving immediately, and my eyes were darting along the tree line rapidly, searching for what was causing that fear as I broke out in a cold sweat. Two bright eyes, like cat eyes, sat about 3 feet above the ground, about the size of a baseball. It wasn't like the eyes watching from the darkness in movies where they're glaring. These eyes were wide open, unblinking, and staring right at me. I felt like prey. Then slowly, the eyes rose up until the creature was standing about 6 feet high. Now I could see its outline. It was huge, bigger than anything I had ever seen. That's when its lips pulled back from its teeth, and I hauled my ass back to my house. I lived in Three Kings County. I was walking down my grandfather's logging trail, getting ready for his funeral. I'm also an avid mushroom collector, so I'm always walking slowly and staring at the ground. My friends hate me. So I get to this cool little white-capped mushroom and stop to take a close-up picture of it. That's when I heard it. The best way I can describe it was if someone with a lot of flesh on his knuckles were punching a tree. Now, I know what deer sound like when they stomp to protect their children or are smashing their antlers on a tree. I've heard bear, cats, moose, pretty much any animal in Yosemite that exists. So naturally, I looked up and freaked out. It was so rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. It went on for minutes at the same pace. So being the curious person I am, I let out a whistle that couldn't be mistaken for a bird. I'm looking in the direction of the thudding and can see about 70 to 100 feet through my grandfather's well-trimmed trees and see nothing. Right after my whistle, I hear a low, quick whistle back. My first thought is, oh, it must be some asshole logger scoping the land past the no trespassing gate. Ignorant, I know. So I yell out, "Hello!" pretty much as loudly as I could. Then, whatever it was, ran away faster than I've ever seen a human being run. And using my experience with deer, dogs, moose, bear, I assessed that it couldn't possibly rationalize it being a four-legged creature. I know what they sound like running, and this was much closer to a two-legged creature. I'm 100% positive on that. What doesn't make sense, however, is that the two-legged creature that ran away from me, faster than any two-legged creature I'd ever heard before, also sounded like it was a minimum 250 pounds. The steps were loud and frantic. A lot of people believe Bigfoot has a spiritual connection to the forest it remains in, and thus the creatures in it as well. I do not find it a coincidence that this happened the day of my grandfather's funeral. I ran all the way home. I was on a 4-day canoeing trip with my friends in a remote part of Yosemite National Park, back when I was a young teen. We were up late, built a bonfire, goofed off as young boys do. I'm sure we were making a lot of noise. Eventually the fire died down to coals, and we just sat around it, talking, when we heard a distant high-pitched scream. It freaked us out for a little bit, but eventually we forgot about it and went back to talking. A while later, one of my friends pointed to the opposite bank of the river and says, "Guys, what is that?" We looked, and standing there in the trees was a huge silhouette of some figure watching us. It was faint, but it was illuminated by the full moon, and it was huge. We just kind of stared at it in shock for a moment before backing away. We went to get our friend's dad and some flashlights. He was intent on showing us that nothing was there. We got back to the spot, and it was still there. We shined our flashlights on it, but it wasn't enough to get a better look. but the thing's eyes shone red with the reflection of our flashlights. We watched it watching us for a bit, and it walked up along the embankment and then walked back and disappeared into the woods. That was more than a decade ago, and we rarely talk about it. We were all pretty freaked out. When I was little, my family owned a cabin on a lake in Yosemite. It was pretty remote at the time, though. It's been more heavily developed over the past 10 years. Anyways, when we would go to the cabin, we would often go for picnics in a huge field at the edge of a farmer's field. One day, we set up our picnic spot at the edge of the very steep hill. At the bottom of the hill, the field met the tree lines of a very large forest. I was too young to remember everything that happened, but this is what I was told by my sisters and my parents. We were sitting on the field eating when my dad heard a really loud banging coming from the bottom of the hill, where the tree line met the field. We walked to the crest of the hill and saw an enormous white creature standing on 2 feet, and taking large logs and throwing them over its head and banging it off of tree trunks to make a loud noise. He showed my mom. She saw it, and we decided to pack up and leave. They were creeped out. Now, my parents are very sane and rational people, so they never really talked about it out of fear of sounding insane. No one really wants to claim that they saw a Bigfoot. Well, about 4 years ago, we were having Christmas with my aunt and her family, who also frequent a cabin on the same lake. We ended up talking about the cabin, and we were sharing memories when my aunt said that she had an absolutely unbelievable story that she had never shared with anyone besides my uncle. She would always make a wild blackberry jam in the fall, so she would often go picking for blackberries. One day, she said, though, she saw a bear in the distance eating blackberries, and that it scared the hell out of her, but she continued to pick and watched it in the distance for a while. Well, eventually the thing that she thought was a bear stood up, revealed its white coat of hair, and walked away on 2 feet into the woods. Obviously, we immediately shared our story, and everyone was in awe that we had seen the same thing at approximately the same time in the late 80s. I decided to do a little research, and it turns out that there were a ton of sightings of this thing in the late 80s, and someone was actually so convinced that what he saw was Bigfoot that he dedicated the rest of his life to finding it again. You can look it up. There are numerous reports of people seeing this thing around the time my family saw it. I'm not sure I really believe that this guy found the Bigfoot again, but he claims he found 3 of them together, 2 big and brown, and 1 with thick white fur, an exact description of what my parents and my aunt independently confirmed. I really don't know what to think. The rational part of me knows it probably wasn't Bigfoot, but I respect everyone in my family's sanity and intellect, and everyone was convinced that what they saw was not a bear, and was covered in thick white fur, and walked on 2 legs. I don't know how you can explain that away. In the 80s, my cousin was on a camping trip with his wife. It wasn't a busy day for camping, and according to my cousin, the ranger told them that they were the only ones camping there that night. Anyways, so it's getting late, and my cousin said he'd spot something across the lake. He thought it was a bear standing, so he grabbed his binoculars. It was sort of like a bear, but it was standing up on its legs. He said it wasn't a bear because it had a face like a 70-year-old man, and the fur was longer than a bear. He thought maybe it was someone in a suit. It disappeared quickly, whatever it was. He was spooked and wanted to leave the park immediately. His wife thought he was being ridiculous, though, just having an overactive imagination. She had brought a shotgun and insisted that they'd be fine if anything happened. Anyways, so that night, everything's going fine, until my cousin is awakened by footsteps. His wife is still asleep, but he doesn't want to wake her up. He just tries to keep as still and as quiet as possible. A figure approaches the tent. My cousin said he was positioned so that his head was on the corner of the tent. This figure leans down and gently presses its hand around the corner of the tent, so the figure is basically putting its hand around my cousin's head. I don't remember how long he said this lasted, but this figure eventually left. My cousin said it smelled like a mechanical thing, like something working on a car, although he heard no car. The next morning, everything at the campsite was untouched. No problems at all. My cousin didn't mention anything about finding footprints. There wasn't any evidence that someone had been there. He eventually went and researched the area and discovered their camping area is supposedly a hotspot for Bigfoots. He firmly believes that he saw some kind of Sasquatch. I'm not sure if I believe him. If anything, I always thought it was just a person messing with him. I was about 8. My sister was 6 or 7. My family and I had went camping in Yosemite National Park. It was a routine camping trip, fishing, hiking, fires, etc. Well, on the second day we were there, my dad was chopping up some firewood, and he had asked me to go grab some kindling and to take my sister along. No problem. Off we went. We made it about, I want to say, 100 or so yards into a small clearing in the woods, within shouting distance if need be. I was gathering twigs and handing them to my sister when I smelled a smell. The kind of smell that smells smelly. If I had to describe it, it was a mixture of wet dog fur, fish, pine, damp wood, and hot dog shit melting on a city sidewalk. The smell was so bad that it made my eyes water, and I suggested we go back, thinking it was a carcass. And if it was a carcass, that means there are predators around. I turned around to tell my sister we're leaving when I noticed something against a tree in the distance a few meters away. I for sure thought it was a bear, so I panicked and ran towards my sister to grab her and get the fuck out. As I approached, though, I must have startled this thing, because what was once just a massive, indistinguishable brown something behind a tree stood up and turned so it was standing profile. I will never, ever forget what I saw that day. It is engraved too deeply into my memory that I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. It stood up, and I mean stood up. It had to have been 8 feet tall. Its face was almost human-like, but with ape features. Sloped brow, protruded lips, and the back of its head was flat with a cone-like ship on the top, like a gorilla. I was frozen with fear, but I wanted desperately to get out of there. I very quietly called to my sister, who was maybe 10 feet away from me at this point, still gathering twigs. "Let's go," Mom called us back. I slowly walked over to her, my eyes locked on this thing the entire time. As soon as I grabbed her,